Hey, with you evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it.
Helen sat at the machine in the bearing shop of the colony and still could not understand how she, a well-known cardiac surgeon in the city, could find herself in the zone among thieves and murderers. Tears made her face and prevented her from working. Her hands shook with a small tremor at the realization that she would no longer operate her lot, now sewing scoops for working people, which she is completely unskilled at doing. Helen has a different calling to treat people. She has loved her job since she was a little girl. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, and she did. But one doctor's mistake ruined her whole life. A sharp shout from the warders interrupted the woman's painful thoughts. Condemned Helen, where do you want me to go? Confused asked Helen, you ask a lot of questions. Go where they lead you. The warder answered rudely. They walked down the long, narrow corridor of the colony. Helen for a moment imagined another long corridor, but of the hospital where she worked, the smiling faces of the doctors and nurses, and then the same faces, but already amazed, when she was taken straight from her workplace to the police station. Come in. Helen was brought back from heaven to earth by the loud voice of the hospital warden. Only now did she realize that she was on the threshold of the office of the warden of the colony. William Favors. That's what the sign on the door said. Helen was slightly confused. Then she received a push in the back and found herself inside the office. Come in, Helen. Don't be shy. In a suspiciously affectionate tone spoke a gray-haired man who was sitting in a chair behind the desk. Where have you been brought? You must have realized. The 60-year-old Colonel William had long ago earned an early state pension, but for some reason he delayed his retirement every year. His subordinates feared him for his stern temper and violent nature. Any disobedience of his orders was inevitably punished by punishment. At the sight of Helen, Williams' voice sounded ingratiating, even belittling. The woman immediately tensed inwardly, not knowing what to expect. Helen, I know you're the best heart surgeon in the city, and not only in the city, but outside of it too. It's a freak accident that you're here. My grandson has a severe heart defect. We were treated by many doctors, but it turned out that they are not doctors, but dilettantes. Nothing helped my grandson. It only got worse. Suddenly, the colonel's voice trembled, and now my grandson is dying, and only you, Helen, can save him. I'm asking you to familiarize yourself with the medical history and perform the operation professionally. Helen's breath caught, and she could only babble. But I am in the colony. I have no right, and I can't, because William interrupted her half-heartedly. The question of the colony, a place in the hospital for the operation, I will solve no problem. If everything goes well, I promise that I will get you parole in a short period of time. William, I can't do the surgery. My hands have been shaking since the minute I walked into the police station. A surgeon has to have movements, home to the millimeter. If my hands are shaking, I'm not a surgeon, and the surgery is doomed to failure. I'm not the only doctor in town. I can recommend you another very competent specialist. Honestly answered Helen. After these words, the colonel led and changed in his face. He was used to being obeyed unconditionally and did not tolerate refusals. His loyal mood was immediately replaced by a flash of anger. What the hell are you talking about? I'm giving you a chance to get out early, and you dare to refuse me? Well, you have no choice. Either you agree to the operation tomorrow, or I'll give you a life of paradise in the penitentiary. Helen's heart squeezed with sudden pain and fear, but she bravely held on and said, looking into William's eyes, you have no right to do lawlessness. It is a crime. Then the colonel completely lost his temper, staggered over to Helen, and shaking his fist in front of her face, wheezed. This is my territory. What I want, I do what I want. That's not true. There are laws you have to obey, or you could end up in jail yourself. I'll go to my husband. He has connections. He'll help me. Helen pulled her last trump card. She's behind her husband's fame, like a stone wall. He's still at it, trying to appeal the court's decision to send her to juvie. But William's reaction to her husband's words threw Helen into a real shock. He laughed in her face. You say you'll go to your husband. He suddenly turned around, and with one hand grabbed one of the folders lying on the table. Here, study this. What is it? Helen asked in surprise. Having opened the folder, she turned pale and could barely stay on her feet. My God, these are divorce papers. How to live now? Frantically thought the woman, trying to grasp the right thought as a straw. But there were no thoughts. Only fear and horror of what had happened remained. The colonel, seeing the genuine confusion on Helen's face, barked, "There's no need to snot here. Go to the cell and remember my words. If you don't do what I want, you'll go to hell early." Helen staggered toward the door, struggling to move his feet. His hands trembled even more. The folder with documents crept into them like on waves, miraculously not falling on the floor. "Helen, where did you go?" As undermined, "Come to your senses, finally. You're in the colony, not on the outside." The warden shouted angrily, grabbing Helen by the shoulder with such force that the bones seemed to crunch. The woman felt no physical pain. The mental pain inflicted by her husband was 100 times worse. He and Glory, together all their lives in the same kindergarten, went to the same school, the same institute. They married for great love. Studying in the 3rd year, they became doctors. She was a surgeon and he was a traumatologist. They worked in the same hospital. Only later the couple's professional paths diverged. Sam was drawn to business. He left the hospital, went into the medical supplies and equipment business. So he succeeded that he became a big businessman in town. But Sam's departure from the medical world has not affected their family ideal with Helen. Every year the relationship only grows stronger. But God didn't give this tragedy to their children. Each of them perceived in his own heart, deeply hiding it in his heart. The clang of the bolt on the iron doors brought Helen back to reality. She found herself in a cell surrounded by many women as miserable as she was. She was lucky with her cellmates. On her first day in this horrible place, they accepted her as their own. No humiliation or insults were even out of the question. Helen's heart was pounding frantically and her head split open. From the unbearable pain, she crouched on the bunk, cupped her head with her hands and looked down. Suddenly, she saw a sheet folded in two on the floor. It must have fallen out of the folder. She brought in her eyes, glazed over from the lines written in small handwriting. Crest. It was her husband's handwriting. It dawned on Helen after reading it. She wanted to die on the spot, even from a bullet in the back of the head, as they used to execute egregious criminals. "I don't care what it is. As long as I don't know this monstrous betrayal. Helen, I'm very worried about you. You know," you wrote Sam, "but I've been offered a contract job abroad. If everything works out, I'll get a lot of money. I'll be able to make new connections, develop my business even more. But none of that's gonna happen. When they find out I'm married to a bunny. Helen, I'm sorry, but I filed for divorce. There's no other way out. I've sent the papers for you to hand over. Please sign. Time will pass, and we'll meet again." The paper trembled in Helen's hands. Despair gripped her body and soul. "Oh my God, my hands are shaking. I will never be able to operate again. My husband is gone. Then I'll never be happy." Alone, the woman ducked her face into the pillow and sobbed silently. Her shuddering sobs. Her shoulders did not escape the camera's gaze down. Helen, that what there are killed. Did the man abandoned? Adriana guessed. A slim screwdriver. As everyone around here called her for professionally opening the doors of the apartments her gang robbed. This was her 3rd trip. "Don't go crazy over this. My husband left me too. I'm still alive. As you can see," she continued subtly, and me. There were voices of women from deep inside the cell. "Before us there are half of such abandoned. Who needs bunnies? No one. It is not an honorary title, which we are proud of. We can only stand up for ourselves like iron bars. Isn't that right, girls?" "Yes," the voices answered one after another. "That's what, Helen. Get in the right frame of mind. You'll be here for a long time, friend of my life, and when you get out, you'll decide what to do next." Helen took the face glow off the pillow and flipped through it. Thanks, girls, for the encouragement. She couldn't remember how long it was before she fell into a dream. How long had she slept? But she woke up to one of her cellmates shaking her lightly by the shoulder. "Helen, get up, breakfast." Yeah, I got up with difficulty." Helen, warm up lull limbs. The prisoners streamed into the mess hall, their favorite place to get some sense of isolation from the outside world. On the way out of the mess hall, Helen was pulled by her sleeve by the warden. Today was different from yesterday, kinder and more respectful. "Helen, do you remember talking to William yesterday? He's waiting until tonight for your answer." "What should I tell him?" asked the warden. "No," Helen replied confidently. I can't do what he asks now. I can't physically do it. Think Helen. Oh, think hard about your actions. William is ruthless and always keeps his word. Whatever he offers you, accepting it is still better than the punishment that comes with refusing. Do you still have time? Sincere advice from the warden. She was a stern-looking woman, but she had managed not to lose her best human qualities during her many years of work here. Another day in the colony was coming to an end as I'd worked in the workshop and thought sad thoughts. It was about to be time to go to bed. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the clanking of keys. A second later, the door to the cell opened. "Condemned Helen to the exit," shouted the warden. "Where are you taking her?" "Out for the night," she screamed with all her might. "The camera is subtly clear that such trips will do no good. I'll stop talking. It's none of your business." The warden cut me off. "And you move, Helen, Helen? Hold on, whatever it is. We'll be waiting for you." Seeing her off the cellmate's admonition, Helen shuddered with her whole body, foreboding something wrong. "Helen, and I'd warned only one. I don't understand why you have to make such a mockery of yourself," the cellmate said, leading Helen down a long corridor. Finally, she stopped at one of the many doors and said with a heavy sigh, "You will spend tonight in this cell." The door rattled shut behind Helen's back. She looked inside the cell and staggered. For a moment, she thought she was going to faint. A row of upper and lower bunks were confused in front of her in a row that seemed like it would go on forever. Dozens of eyes looked at her, some with a smirk, some with curiosity, and some with outright hatred. Helen tried hard not to lose her composure. Her intuition told her that something terrible was about to happen, what William and the warders had frightened her with. She squatted on the edge of the empty bunk just to sit down. "Where's the greeting?" "I'm not in the cow shed. Who gave you permission to sit down, anyway?" It stood up. From the depths of the cell came a booming, unpleasant female voice. Helen's heart clenched. She couldn't even move. The bunny in the cell took it as disobedience. Immediately, she jumped off the bunk, and as hell appeared in front of her, tall, powerful as a rock. She towered over Helen like a kite over the just-caught prey. "Why didn't you get up? You've lost all fear." She shouted and put her hand over the woman's head to intimidate her. Helen was worked up physically and mentally to such an extent that she no longer cared what would happen to her. She plucked up her courage and, looking at the look in her eyes, said, "I don't have to answer to anyone, especially not to murderers and thieves." Bunny pushed Helen away. It was a miracle she stayed on her feet. "You're the murderer. You're the murderer in the white coat. The worst and the most ruthless. And now we're going to be merciless, and we're going to put her down." At her call, a bunch of bunnies jumped off their bunks and rushed to the door. As soon as that crutch had spun around, Helen's eyes darkened beside her. She felt like 100 hands were dragging her straight to hell. After another push in the back, she flew to the floor and lost consciousness. Helen woke up in the prison hospital. She felt that someone was holding her hand tightly and shouting, "Here, faster." She came to her senses. Helen slowly opened her eyes and felt a middle-aged man staring at her intently. His face and voice seemed familiar to her. After a moment, the man asked Helen, "How are you feeling?" "Thank God, there's nothing wrong. It's all gone. There is a hematoma and abrasions. Will get better quickly." Suddenly, Helen remembered the events of yesterday. It made her squeeze inwardly and tears came to her eyes. The man jumped up and rushed to comfort her. "Helen, don't cry, please. It's over more bad stuff. Nothing will happen to you here. I promise you. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here in this colony." After a second, he timidly asked, "You remember me, don't you?" Helen nodded her head and quietly said, "Mike, you." She easily remembered Mike, a classmate, even though they hadn't seen each other for 15 years after graduating from medical school. Short, funny, with freckles on his face. He had tried to woo Helen in his freshman year, but she didn't notice any men except Sam, her then future husband. And now Mike had changed a lot, from a clean-cut boy into a serious, solid man. "Mike, what are you doing in the colony?" Helen couldn't think of a reasonable explanation for his presence. "I work here as a prison doctor. It just so happens. My stepdad asked me to take a temporary job, stayed forever." Helen flipped fearfully through, startled by a terrible hunch. "Your stepfather is William. You didn't know that. My father died of a heart attack. just after I graduated from college. My mom suddenly remarried a couple of years later. William. Helen interrupted Mike abruptly. We're not talking about him. To treat a woman like that, even a prisoner, is low and despicable. Helen, I know it's very hard, but I'm sorry. I'm begging him. He's completely mad with worry about his only grandson. He doesn't know what he's doing. A few years ago, his son from his first marriage died ridiculously, and now his grandson's life hangs in the balance. The boy is 8 years old and spends almost all his time in hospitals. He's even been treated abroad. There was improvement, of course, but the disease still could not be reversed. Mike so frantically begged for forgiveness and pleaded for the boy that Helen realized that her heart had trembled. She had already forgotten about her trembling hands, which had calmed down in Misha's arms. The woman felt that just a little more, and she would agree. If there is even the slightest chance for a favorable outcome in saving the child, then one should definitely use it. Mike, why am I especially now that I'm in jail for malpractice? Helen, because you're a unique doctor, a surgeon from God. You've saved hundreds of lives. Stephen is one of them, William's friend, through whom he found out about you. Only he couldn't ask you for your help as a human being. In the next moment, Mike looked into Helen's eyes with such genuine sincerity that her heart even beat faster. And then confidently said to Helen, I don't understand how you could be locked up and charged with premeditated murder. I don't believe you made a mistake. You'll be exonerated. I'll do my best to make it happen. Mike, I don't know either, Helen said, swallowing back tears. I did everything right, but the conclusion just killed me. They decided that my actions resulted in the death of a man. They stared at each other for several seconds. Then Helen said, Mike, give me this boy's medical records. I'll see what I can do, as his name is Jack, and the chart here is William left it for me. Helen was greeted like family by her cellmates. My gosh, she's back and alive. Finn exclaimed and immediately ran up to her. And the other female inmates followed her. We never thought we'd see you again. Adriana could not calm down. Then we found out that they'd put you in a cell with a repeat offender. We almost lost our minds. It's a good thing it didn't happen. Thank you, my girls, Helen said sincerely and plunged headlong into the medical records. My God, what doctors were treating this boy? He should have been operated on more than once, and everything would have been different. It's a shame, it's a waste of time. Now it's gotten to the point that his heart had grown in size and was pressing on other organs. It's snowballed into more problems. It's going to take more than one operation, and I'm going to operate. Helen was determined. I will take control of myself. They will not treacherously shake. You just don't have to dwell on it. Repeatedly compelled myself. Helen William, as promised, had gotten the convict Helen to operate in a real hospital with good equipment and reliable medical staff. Assist her. The woman threw out of her head all the huge negativity that lasted on her mind and talent, directed to the boy's heart, which must necessarily beat, and it worked. The first operation was a success. From that day on, Helen's life ceased to be hopeless. It made sense. Jack, a kind, bright boy. Helen swore to herself that she would do everything possible and impossible for this child to live on Mike. Couldn't have done it without his support. Kind, considerate, willing to do anything to save Jack, to save her, and more. Helen felt like Mike was looking at her in a special way, the same way he looked at her at the Institute when he confessed his love. Helen kept catching herself thinking that she wished it were so. 4 months passed. That Saturday afternoon, Helen would remember for the rest of her life. The inmate was preparing to go to the mess hall for breakfast. Suddenly the door opened and a loud voice from the hospital warden rang throughout the cell, condemning Helen to leave with her belongings. Helen did not pay attention to the last word, unlike her former cellmates, who immediately understood the meaning of this expression. Before Helen had time to recollect, Helen subtly shouted joyfully, Helen, you are being released, you will be set free. No, why would you think that? Adriana, I know for a fact, trust me, Tomio wouldn't stop. All the inmates clapped their hands in joy. Helen couldn't believe her eyes when she found herself at the door of the warden's office again. Only this time everything was different, without bullying, insults, and threats. Helen, dear Helen. William, the warden said enthusiastically. Dear Helen, I never thought that this man could utter such words. The following phrase shocked the woman. Today is your last day in the colony, and you have been acquitted by a higher court. William handed her the documents, and this is from me personally from my grandson. I suddenly pulled a large bouquet of red roses from under the table. Helen looked at Mike, who was standing next to me. Yes, Helen, it's true. Smiling, Mike said, in addition, the examination proved that there is no relationship between your actions and the death of a person. You are fully rehabilitated, as a doctor restored in all rights, and you can operate again. Tears streamed down Helen's face, but only they were tears of joy. And then another surprise awaited her. The first night she was free, Mike proposed to her. Helen, marry me, he said, handing her a box containing an engagement ring. Developed. Helen said in astonishment, no, I'm not married. I couldn't find a girl like you. Helen agreed to Mike's proposal. 2 months later, they were married. And 9 months later, they had a son named Jack.